It is time to return to Wind Waker Unflooded, a 3D modeling fan art project where I am reimagining the Kingdom of Hyrule as it could have existed within the world of the Wind Waker. It's a really ambitious project. I've been really thankful for everyone watching. Y'all know the drill. Y'all know what this is about. It's Wind Waker Unflooded. Let's go back to another video. Let's go! But yeah, I've been thrilled to return to modeling after a hiatus in the work on this project. It's been really nice to come back and see all of y'all's comments, see just how excited y'all are about the project and how passionate y'all still are about it. And I guess it totally makes sense, right? Some of us, we've been waiting 20, 25 years, give or take, to see a project like this, to see what Hyrule really would have looked like in the art style of the Wind Waker, right? Because it's not just like we've seen Hyrule before. This project isn't about what does Hyrule look like. It's about realizing it in the Wind Waker's art style, how it lines up with Wind Waker's Islands of the Great Sea. Y'all know the Islands of the Great Sea are the mountains of Hyrule. So what exactly, how do all the islands actually line up? What is below Windfall Island? What is below Outset? What is the truth? Where's Lake Hylia? What island is that under? All of these questions about what does it look like to peel back the ocean, the Great Sea? What's truly underneath? That's what this project's about. It's not just reimagining Hyrule, but it's about connecting it to the Wind Waker. And it's been so nice just to work on it. Story-wise, of course, this is supposed to be a prologue to Wind Waker. I'm trying to make Hyrule as it could have existed before the Great Flood. That's what this project is about. And today we are working on the Chamber of Sages. So let's talk a bit about that before I ramble about anything else. I really want to make sure in these videos that I'm talking about what I'm actually working on in the modeling. I think that that's important. So my idea, of course, is that there are sages in the time of the Wind Waker, right before the flood. Some of these are descendants of the sages from Ocarina of Time, but there are differences. I think there would be cultural shifts over time where the elements would even change. We know that throughout Hyrule's history, the elements have changed over time, right? Going from Ocarina of Time's elements to the elements of, Tears of the Kingdom, for example. It's a slightly different set of elements. And even Wind Waker, right? Wind Waker introduces earth and wind, neither of which existed in Ocarina of Time's elemental sages. So there's room for things shifting, and I guess that's the thing, right? Is I can use Ocarina of Time as a basis, but this is a new time period that is unlike any other period of Hyrule's history. So I'm thinking about what is different, right? In Ocarina of Time, the sages all had this they spiritually existed in this chamber of sages in the sacred realm, right? Protecting the Triforce, right? And I want to kind of connect it to Wind Waker's take on the sages, which are people that are that they pray in their respective temples, and they watch over those temples. They are protectors of their people, but they are people who are essentially their duty is to kind of communicate between, kind of be the ambassadors of Hyrule to the goddesses, right? That their prayers matter and have real consequences and power. And if their line of prayer is broken, then that's something that could disrupt the seals of the sages against Ganondorf, for instance, right? Or the empowerment of the Master Sword, right? So their prayers matter and are listened to by the gods, right? And part of that is music. In Wind Waker, we are shown that they pray through the playing of music. That's something that's really important, right? That the king conducts them, but their music is heard by the gods. That's a really important idea for the sages in Wind Waker. So I really like the idea that if they are coming together to meet, to convene, to have this kind of council, right, of all of the tribes in Hyrule. Obviously, that is something that is important politically as this kind of United Nations kind of thing, right? All of the kingdoms of Hyrule coming together, under the king, but also to play music together. And so I think it would be important for them to have a space for that, right? Where it's important that they come together to pray together, to worship, to play their songs, that they would all have different instruments. And so I thought that it would make sense to kind of put that next to the Temple of Time, that's a part of Central Hyrule, but I didn't necessarily want it to be in the castle. I think there's several reasons for that. Obviously, these are sages from all across the kingdom. I think it makes sense that not all of them might like the castle is a something to protect, right? You don't necessarily want just anyone walking in, and the sages aren't just anyone, but I think there is a question of loyalty and allegiances that throughout this part of the story, that's something that may not be a guarantee. You don't know if if you can trust all of the sages, right? Are they all on the side of the king? I think that could be part of Hyrule's downfall, story-wise, right? And this is all just built into the map. And I think that, like, and I've told you before, right, that, like, part of my ambition for this project is, after the map is done, to create short films that are cutscene style, short films, as if they are, like, in-game cutscenes. Like, that's the presentation taking place in this map. But telling the story of how Hyrule has its fall leading up to the Great Flood before the events of the Wind Waker. That's my ambition. So it's like the storytelling matters, and making sure that I'm thinking about that through the creation of the map and through the writing of those scripts, that matters. So I guess I want to talk about the story as I talk about the modeling, right? Because it's all interwoven. But even without those cutscene style short films, the map itself tells you a story. And I think that that's really important, right? There's environmental storytelling that is just inherent to this project. So I repeat that just because I think that that's important to keep in mind. But yeah, I really like the idea of this kind of garden outside the Temple of Time where they can meet and convene, and they might even go inside the Temple of Time to play their music. I'm not exactly sure maybe what that ritual would look like, because I'm not exactly sure what instruments they would all have. But I've had an idea that maybe, like, the Light Sage might play an organ within the Temple of Time. So maybe it makes sense that they go inside to play, but can convene outside for the sake of meetings, right? I think that might kind of be the progression, right? I'm not exactly sure what I have in mind for each sage's instrument. That's something definitely to think about. But I definitely like the idea of the Light Sage having this organ, right? So, which is, emblematic of the fact that, like, the Light Sage, I think, would be directly the sage that is the most connected to Hyrule Castletown, to the royal family. I think they would be like the high priest, basically, over the Temple of Time. And so giving them the most powerful instrument, right? It's like, I think that that's telling, right? Like, maybe the sages should be on common ground, but they're not. There is a power dynamic, and they are all conducted by the king. And so I think that those are all just things to think about in the story. That's part of how Hyrule's downfall as well, right? Is that there is not equality amongst the tribes, and maybe there should be, but Hyrule Castle is something that exerts influence over the rest of the kingdom, right? And yet these other tribes of Hyrule have their own kings, right? Of course, Ganondorf is the Gerudo king, right? The Gorons might have their own chieftain, but the Zora typically have a royal family. They have a king of the Zora, right? And so it's I think that that's important for the storytelling here, is that, like, these are tribes that they have been unified under the king of Hyrule, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's that they might be pursuing their own political systems, right? They might want their own independence, separate of the king of Hyrule. And so I think that there would be some disparity there, right? And there's a lot of things to get into, right? Like, seeing it just as, like, a political revolution against a monarchy, and that's planting the seeds for rebellion that leads to Ganondorf's return and some of that unrest. Like, obviously, like, that's a big part of it, but I think there would be more to it, but that's something to get into in a future video. But just thinking about, like, the sages and how they interact, I think that's important to talk about in this video. I do want to talk about, like, the aesthetic influence as well. This is kind of inspired. It's not one for one, but there's just ideas that are similar. I visited Stirling Castle a couple of years ago. Beautiful, beautiful castle. And it has this garden called, I think, the Queen Anne's Garden, which is just absolutely gorgeous. And that's an inspiration. But outside of Stirling Castle, there's this Church of the Holy Rood, I think is what it's called. And it's on this hilltop overlooking the city of Stirling, kind of between the castle and the city. And so you're up on this hill, and there's a churchyard, and there's a graveyard outside of the church, and it's this just beautiful sanctuary, right? With all of these graves outside, and there's these trees up on a hill overlooking the city. And so I kind of want to just have some of that influencing this garden where the sages would meet, this garden outside of the Temple of Time, right, where you can see all of these graves, right? It is a churchyard, and it's overlooking the city, right? And there's this kind of like power there where the sages would meet up on the hill. And there still are other mountains in the area for where the Temple of Time is, right? Like it's below the cliffs, up where like some of the islands are, right? Like it's not as high up as like Hateno Village, or like the Triangle Islands, which are up on the cliffs above Hyrule Castle Town. But like it's up on a hill, over the lake, right? And the castle town is kind of like down on the lake. So there is like a power dynamic there. But I just thought that would be just like something nice to kind of like borrow from. Stirling Castle is beautiful in that whole area and that hilltop. That really left an impression on me when I visited. And there's so much history there. And I guess like that's the thing too, just to bring up, right? Obviously like Wind Waker Unflooded is inspired by Zelda and Zelda's lore. And that's really important to me to think about and to try to be consistent with as I make this project, right? Like I'm making it to try to fit into the world of Zelda. And I'm trying to borrow locations from other Zelda games and dig into the lore as much as I can within the game text of the Wind Waker and try to figure out what it's implying and what its environmental design implies. That's really important to me. But it's also like this is my project inspired by my own experience, my own travels, my own ideas about history and religion and philosophy and, spirituality, all these things that are important to me that come from my own perspective. This project is totally channeled through that. So I just want to say that, right? And I've said that, like, I think in different videos in different ways, but I think just, like, what that means is I'm not just borrowing from Hyrule. I'm borrowing from, this real world. I think that that's what's important is, because if I'm just telling the story in the context of Zelda, what does it matter? What's the point? Obviously, it's like we have a connection to the Zelda franchise, so even just telling stories within that context is meaningful. But it's not just about how things connect to other games. That's not the motivation. It's what do I have to express that is new, right? So it's just like, and part of that is all wrapped up in this map where I'm fully executing this idea that a game from 20 years ago flirted with, right? Like what would Hyrule look like in the Wind Waker's art style? And we just never fully saw that realized. Obviously, aesthetically, that is a motivation. But then beyond that, why would I have a perspective on creating this entire world? That's not just pulled from the Wind Waker, that's pulled from all of these other ideas that I have about world building and how I see Hyrule and what I think Hyrule is supposed to represent, and things I connect it to within the real world. Often Hyrule is seen as this kingdom that is on a decline. It's powerful, but it is meant to fall. Ganondorf takes it over, right? The soldiers of Hyrule can be corrupted. We see Dark Nuts. We see these evil soldiers in A Link to the Past. The forces of Hyrule is not necessarily the force of good. Even if Zelda is meant to be saved, even if we're meant to protect the princess, and like protect these people. Obviously, the people are worth protecting, but the system might be rotten. And I think that's part of Wind Waker's philosophy as well, right? We serve the king, and we protect Zelda, and we work with Zelda herself. But it is within the ruins of this kingdom. The kingdom itself is not what's worth protecting. It's the people in it, of course, right? So I just think all of these things matter, and just thinking about like what are Zelda games trying to say? Because obviously their stories it's not always Shakespeare, but these writers of these games do have things to say, to express. And I think the philosophy of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time, those games especially really show a lot of intentionality within how they handle political ideas and philosophical ideas, and I think it's worth diving into that. And I'm trying really hard to tap into what are they saying, what real world histories are they pulling from, how can I connect to that, and what do I have to say within that when I tell a new story. I think that's really meaningful. And that new story, like I said, is both inherent within the creation of the map and within future short films, I hope. So I'm excited to just keep moving forward on those. I've been outlining a lot recently, and I'm excited just to keep developing that. I've shared some ideas on the channel before. I think I did a video just called like the story of Wind Waker Unflooded, and it gets into some of my outlining ideas. But anyway, just without further ado, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate just everyone that cares about this project, and feel free to leave comments as always about ideas that y'all have about the project, places y'all want to see on the map, things that you think, maybe you think, Joe, I would have done that differently. Let me know. Let me know y'all's ideas, y'all's feedback, things that y'all want to see in the project. But without further ado, I'll let you go. Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.